What the fuck just happened?
Everything. That's what happened. Everything.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is only for the second time that we are doing this, and honestly, the first time we did it was just through our social media pages. This is the first time we're going on YouTube here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is breaking news from the MMA Outsider. I'm Tom Albano, and that is Zain Bando. And as you said, Zan, everything has happened at once. It has gotten absolutely bonkers here in this world of mixed martial arts. You thought what we were just talking about this past week with Dana White was nuts. You think we were talking about what's going on with the slap fighting promotion, with the passing of uh, Victoria Lee, which, by the way, shout out to UFC, class move by acknowledging her death in one of the pre-fight things. Everything has now changed. We now have the biggest story of the year thus far, and well, Zan, it's because one of the biggest fights that could have happened this year. One of the biggest fights, actually, when we were going to the MMA awards thing, Zan, our little MMA awards thing for Zan 2022, we said a fight that needed to happen in 2023, probably the most anticipated one, is now officially up in smoke. So, Jon Jones is officially returning to the UFC. Going back, as we kind of expected, Zan, we talked about it, that it would happen in March at UFC 285, T-Mobile in Vegas for the heavyweight championship, and it will be for the full heavyweight championship. It will be against Ciryl Gane, however, the former interim champion. And the reason why, the second part of that breaking news, for, I would have to say, Zan, the first time since, I think, BJ Penn, when he was the lightweight champion nearly 20 years ago. And nearly it could have been if Couture had officially left when he was the heavyweight champion at the end of the
Exactly.
months. For the first time, a UFC champion, let alone a UFC heavyweight champion, is parting ways with the promotion. Francis Ngannou, per UFC president Dana White at the UFC Vegas 67 post-fight press conference, has been outright released by the UFC. There is no waiver period. There is no matching period. He is gone. He is now free to sign with any promotion, according to Dana White. And keep in mind, this is from Dana White. This is from the promotion side. Francis Ngannou was offered in the last resort offer, an offer that would have made him the highest paid heavyweight in UFC history, and Ngannou has turned that down. He is gone from the UFC. There is no, okay, on March 4th, when the cage door closes, he is stripped, when the referee says, let's get on. No, he is done. Finito. Gone. Hasta la vista. No longer champion. No longer contracted with the UFC. Zan. Holy crap.
Yeah, it's the biggest story of the year, and who knows, by the end of the year, it could end up being the biggest story of 2023. To give you guys a little bit of background, Francis Ngannou took care of business, beat Ciryl Gane in January of 2022, was on the shelf for about 15 months with a knee injury that kept him sidelined for several months after that. And it seemed like for an entire year, Tom, similar to the Randy Couture saga, although that did eventually get done and he fought Brock Lesnar at UFC 91 in 2008, it just felt like this entire 2022 cycle with Francis Ngannou was all of us just sitting around and waiting. When is that perfect deal going to come? And is this going to happen? When we got an update on it, I think it was 3 or so months ago, it looked like things were moving in the right direction. Apparently, something went totally south to make this happen the way that it did. And I have to say that in my MMA fandom career, I guess you could call it, I've been watching this sport since 2006. And this is now the third biggest fight of my lifetime that has gotten away. We had Brock Lesnar versus Fedor in 2009. We had Khabib versus Tony Ferguson in 2020, and now we have Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou as the three biggest fights to never take place in UFC history. And to be quite honest with you, the biggest losers in this whole thing are the fans. The fans have really been the ones that have hyped this fight up for years. It's been a talked about fight ever since Francis Ngannou won the heavyweight title from Stipe Miocic in their rematch. It was a fight that was going to be highly anticipated. And now I just looked this up. Jon Jones, his return to the UFC is nearly 3 years to the day of his last fight at UFC 248 when he has defended the light heavyweight championship. And of
Against
course,
Dominic Reyes.
and again, a very controversial decision. Of course, that would be the last time we would see him at 205 pounds. But to bring it back to center here, this news is extremely shocking. It's unfortunate that both parties couldn't come to an agreement. It would have easily broken several records. It would have been in a fight that would have been talked about for years to come. But now we have to look to the present, and we have a brand new fight for the vacant heavyweight championship. Jon Jones versus Ciryl Gane. Ciryl Gane gets another crack at the UFC heavyweight championship after losing it in his first encounter. Tom, as you and I both know, this fight is extremely intriguing. This fight could go a lot of different ways. Was this the fight that you were expecting if Francis was unable to go? And just out of curiosity, just ranking your excitement, is this a particular fight that you want to see, or do you truly think that the UFC is making this fight because they know that right now the heavyweight title is A in limbo and B heavyweight is not as strong as it once was? Just kind of give me your thoughts on how you're feeling, and if you think that UFC 285 with this news, which is normally the March cards are normally pretty big, is it tarnished any way, shape, or form? And if so, why or why
Good questions, Dan. All good questions. Sorry, I was just tweeting out, guys. Tune in. Come join us. Make sure if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section. Whether you're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, we will get to them as soon as we can. As far as this news goes, Dan, and your questions, so I feel like if it was up to somebody like John, somebody like Dana White, the backup option for Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones would have been Stipe Miocic versus Jon Jones. But you and I have discussed on past episodes of Outsiders that it seems like Stipe Miocic's MMA career is even more up in the air than Jon Jones's was, or Francis Ngannou's was, and now Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou's is. We have not seen Stipe since he lost the heavyweight championship to Francis in March of 2021 at UFC 260. And by all accounts, from those late December rumors before we took our breaks in, that it seemed like Jones was going to fight at UFC 285 one way or another, and it seemed like Stipe was out. So choice 3, which then became choice 2, was going to be Ciryl Gane, the former interim heavyweight champion, defeated Derek Lewis for that interim strap in August of 21 at UFC 265, had his chance at UFC 270 against Francis when Francis had the issues with the knees like we talked about. But then Francis was able to show that his wrestling skills he had seriously worked on. And am I happy about this fight? I think I'm happy about it, Zan, more in the fact that we're going to see Jon Jones return after 3 years away from the octagon. I think I'm happy that we're going to see Jon Jones actually competing at heavyweight after this long saga over 3 years, because keep in mind, Zan, Jones versus Ngannou was also rumored for 2020 when Stipe and DC were a little up in the air during the pandemic. When they were
not?
in their
But
negotiations.
in
Yeah.
in all fairness, who would have wanted to see that fight without a crowd, right?
Now that is true. That is true. And who would have wanted to see that fight without a crowd? Although, but then I think seeing that fight without a crowd is better than what we have right now in never seeing that fight at all, unfortunately. Because now we could have seen Jones versus Ngannou in 2020 for the vacant heavyweight title, if something going wrong between Stipe and DC, or for an interim championship, and now we're just never going to see this point blank period, which
Yeah,
is
well,
an
yeah,
unfortunate scenario.
which is what I alluded to in my tweet. It's truly, you want to talk about MMA crimes. This might be one of the biggest MMA crimes in the 30-year history of this sport. It's truly a bummer. It's like the and I hate to compare it to this, but I feel like this is MMA's version of like basically, for example, Tyson versus Holyfield. Let's call it that way. This felt like it had the magnitude for it to be one of the biggest combat sports events in a really, really, really long time, and it's a bummer that it's happening. This would be the equivalent of Fury versus Joshua, or Fury versus Usyk on the boxing side of things, and we know how that saga is currently going right now. It's not going anywhere. Unfortunately, that's either here nor there. But just to compare it on a magnitude level, this is massive news. And as I alluded to earlier, the biggest losers in this whole thing are the fans that have been dying to see this fight in particular, you and I included. So, and we have a question. Actually, no, we have a comment. Racy Roy says no one was looking forward to the fight. Just Jones returning is the highlight. That's hard to disagree with. What do you think?
I mean, for Jones versus Ngannou, if we're talking about the Jones versus Ngannou fight, I was looking forward to it. I was looking forward to seeing how Jones would look against somebody like an Ngannou. I think my instinct says Ngannou could have used his power to defeat Jones, although Jones is very elusive and could, use his length to avoid Ngannou and be a different kind of challenge for Ngannou, much different than Gane. In terms of Jones versus Gane, I 100% agree with I 100% agree with Mr. Royce there. I feel like the bigger story is Jones returning and Zan, the fact that he is now going for his second uh, division championship. For the longest time, for a decade, Jones had been the king at light heavyweight, for better or for worse, for controversy or for not. Yes, DC had his run for about 3-ish years when Jones was in the trouble, but you saw how the UFC even went out of its way for Jones at times. And now Jones is going to be moving up to heavyweight, which, going back to what I was saying, Zan, is the long time coming, because going back to what I was saying, that Jones versus Ngannou was rumored for 2020, the negotiations, both were left pissed off by the UFC. Jones at one point, Zan, remember, requested his release from the UFC because of the issues of him trying to move up to heavyweight before eventually he was allowed to vacate the championship in mid 2020 and move up to heavyweight. And he said, Zan, part of the reason for this long absence is he wanted to do it right. He didn't want to just jump up and face the best heavyweight in the world. He wanted to take the time to prepare. And Zan, if you have seen the photos from when Jon Jones was a light heavyweight to what Jones has been doing in camp, preparing for a move at heavyweight, he looks stronger. He looks buffer. He looks, I don't want to say tougher, but his muscles are massive. He looks transformed.
Oh yeah, he looks like a totally different fighter, and he looks like a scarier version of what he's always been. And I got to tell you what, I don't know what the early lines are on this Jones Gane fight, but it's hard for me to imagine that Jones doesn't win in this fight in any shape or form, because A, he should, and B, with essentially 3 years in camp under his belt, if you we think about it, he's been in an unofficial training camp for 3 years. That is a bad matchup for Ciryl Gane. Don't get me wrong, Gane is a stud. He can neutralize the range. His leg kicks are awesome. Able to he was able to control the tempo in his last fight in London, and he looked great. But I mean, just overall, stylistically, I just don't think it's a great matchup for Gunn. And you could argue that, what it's going to come down to is the cardio and the gas tank of both men, and it's also going to come down to if Jones can get one more takedown than Gunn, or if Jones can win a round defining strike, if you will, to close the frame well. It's going to be a really long night. But I will say this: if Gon can make it a chess match, we're in for a very interesting heavyweight tilt, and a heavyweight tilt that we probably haven't seen stylistically in several years. This is one of the most even heavyweight title fights on paper stylistically that you will ever break down. It's just going to be a matter of what two versions of these guys are going to show up on fight night on the 4th. And as I alluded to earlier, the March cards are huge for the UFC. So obviously they're hoping that this fight delivers, but just having Jon Jones back will definitely get people interested. And the clock, it's January 14th. The countdown to March 4th has already started, but the countdown to the days to March 4th can't come fast enough, because this is a big fight, and a fight that I think could really change the trajectory of the heavyweight division. And you never know, if Jones wins this fight, could he vacate and retire just because he's done everything he's ever wanted to?
Zan, two things, by the way. But we have another comment, but two things before we get to that comment. Number one, I just checked. There is no line official from the Vegas sports books as of yet, so no
Okay.
line as of yet on Jones versus Gunn that I can find. And actually, I just lost my train of thought about the second thing that I was going to. Second thing I wanted to add on. Yeah, I lost my train of thought. For now, let's just go over to the comment. That's another one from Mr. Royce. Right now, for Francis, a big loss to the sport. We wanted to see him and Jones. Is Jones past his prime mentally? Yes, but physically, has he lost anything? Oh, by the way, sorry. I just remembered the second thing. Going back to actually his first comment about Jon Jones returning is the highlight. Not just that it's the highlight, but it's the business thing that the UFC needed. Zan, keep this in mind. Next week, we've got UFC 283, the vacant light heavyweight title, Figgy Moreno 4. 3 weeks after that, Zan, we have another UFC pay-per-view in Australia, where Volkanovski's going to step up to try become champ against Islam Makhachev. And Makhachev's
Big fight.
big fight, plus an interim featherweight title fight underneath that. Then 3 weeks later, Zan, we have this. Now, Jon Jones' return, vacant heavyweight title on the line. 2 weeks later, Zan, and we're going to get to it in a little bit, Usman versus Edwards 3 is being finalized, where they're going to have their trilogy fight for the welterweight title, plus Gaethje versus Fiziev is the co-main event. For a business thing, Zan, that's 4 pay-per-views, 4 times where a UFC fan could be spending around $80. 4 times in like a 2-month span.
And you can't, and Tom, if you can't tell me this is the greatest quarter one in UFC history, I don't know what is.
And Zan, which is why, and I kind of alluded to it, Zan, in our last episode before the end of 22 and our war show, the UFC needed Jon Jones to be competing on this card. Because now they have, the real alluring power. Going back to Mr. Royce here, what now for Francis, a big loss to the sport. Is Jones past mentally? Yes, but physically, has he lost anything? The second part, Mr. Royce, we're going to find that out on at UFC 285. It's gonna be a
Yeah,
very.
yeah,
Zan,
we're gonna.
I'm sorry, Zan.
Yeah, we're gonna find out for sure. That's number one. And number two, if you were to ask me right now, about 2 months out from the fight, I would say no.
I would say
Just
no based on those photos. That's
agreed.
number one on the eye test. But Zan, also consider, yes, there is such a thing as rust. I mean, think about it when it comes to professional sports. Deshaun Watson had played quarterback for a couple of years, and we've seen the rust that he has. But Zan, I think back to UFC 217. It had been 4 years. I always compared Jones going on the GSP route. GSP hadn't competed in the octagon for 4 years, and he chokes out Michael Bisping and wins the UFC middleweight championship.
It's a
Jones,
similar story, is it? Is it not?
exactly. So that's what I'm saying. Like, honestly, it could very well, Jones may still have it. As far as this part of the story goes, which Mr. Royce would have heard to, Francis Ngannou released, as I said at the beginning of this stream, double G, double O, double N, double E, gone. Gone, gone. There was no matching period. There is no waivers or anything. He's done. John Anik, usually when the title is being vacated, says he will be champion. And then once the cage door closes on the vacant title, fighting the ref says fight, that's when he's vacated. No, title's done. Title is vacated. So there will be no UFC heavyweight champion until March 4th. Jones versus Gane. Granted, that doesn't end in a draw or no contest because we said the same thing about the light heavyweight title.
Or maybe he does. Maybe he does.
I probably just jinxed this. But let's talk about the Francis and Zan. So Francis and the UFC, as I kind of alluded to, have been at odds for quite some time. And Dana White just claimed at the post-fight press conference that Francis would have been the highest paid heavyweight in UFC history. So Zan, do you think Dana is telling the truth? Do you think Francis could be getting paid more? Do you think if Francis goes somewhere, a PFL super fight division, a Bellator, he could get even more paid and he could get at the UFC? Is the truth somewhere in the middle where maybe for the UFC standards, he would be the highest paid heavyweight, but considering how the UFC pay structure works, where do you consider this, Sam? Because like I alluded to at the start of the stream, this is historic. We don't see champions being released by the UFC. We don't see champions parting ways. We haven't seen this since the aughts when the UFC was still struggling, to get any mainstream lights.
Yeah, I don't buy his claim for a second because my counter argument to that is, okay, Dana, if you're saying that Francis Ngannou would have been the highest paid UFC fighter in the history of the division, why was this deal not done over a year ago? Why did it take you guys 15 months to come to this conclusion? Why, when Francis Ngannou was sitting on the sideline asking for more money, why didn't you make him happy and treat him like the heavyweight division is the most important division in the sport? I think there's so many more questions to that you can't just take his claim at his value. You actually have to refute it. And I don't really like to swear much on this podcast, but to me, what he said was absolute bullshit.
I agree. I mean, Zan,
And also, Dana, if you really had a beef with Martel Martin, like you said, and you did 8 months ago, if it was really you that sent those really nasty texts to him, aim on you. Francis doesn't need you anyway. You need Francis more than Francis needs you. So shame on you for not getting it done. It's your fault anyway.
okay, so based on that, San, based on what you just said and based on Mr. Royce's question here, let's go back to what you said about, could Jones just win the title and then say, I'm done? I think that would, releasing Francis now and then Jones making that kind of winning and then making that retirement would be the biggest nightmare scenario for the UFC.
100%.
If that happens, the state of the heavyweight division plummets, especially if, and San, I'm starting to get this feeling because we're talking about Francis and we're talking about Dana and all that. Let's bring Stipe back in. I don't know if we ever see Stipe fight again. Stipe could be done.
Oh, I think he will. Dana alluded to it that he has some things going on right now. We don't obviously want to speculate, but something tells me, and this is my good faith, it's because I'm mainly a positive person. I do think that there is a deal being finalized, but there is something that personally, not from the professional side, that's not allowing Stipe to fight, and whenever he gets through whatever that is, then I think he'll be able to fight. That's what that's my positive theory on that. As we
I mean,
watch the Jaguars maybe pull off a 20-point comeback at home against the Los Angeles Chargers in the
I have
AFC
that.
Wild Card.
I apologize to everyone that I'm turning my head. It's because that's what's going on. Like the Jaguars are about to kick a field goal, and if they get it, it's a 31-30 comeback victory. So, like, I know this is supposed to be an MMA stream, but it's like that's how nuts this was. I was focused on ETB and focused on our NFL wildcard round stuff this week, and now within the span of a few hours, this just completely blew up. And Zan, I'm hopeful. I want to be hopeful, but I know Stipe was saying like heavyweight rematch or bust, heavyweight title rematch or bust, which I kind of understand considering he is the supposed GOAT. That
Yeah,
he
which I
defended the
still,
heavyweight title.
which personally, I still think he is.
He defended the heavyweight title more than anybody else, but it looks like the Chargers are icing the kicker. But Zan, it doesn't help when he lost in the one-sided fashion to Francis like he did. Now, granted, I think there was the opportunity to have the trilogy fight, but now it's been 2 years, and Zan, well, now that's never gonna happen now that Francis is gone.
That's very true. Hang on one second.
Okay. But yeah, I kind of want to agree with you, and if Francis really is going to be the highest paid athlete in UFC heavyweight history, it's good. Oh my God, the Chargers! Oh wait, there's a flag on the play. Uh-oh. I think. Do you see it now? Do you see what's happened?
Not Yeah, I see it now. They're celebrating as if they won the game, and then a white flag drops, and that's where I am right now. Yeah.
Okay. I won't spoil what happens with the flag until you see it, but I kind of want to say I'm in the middle with this. That even if Dana is telling the truth, considering the UFC's pay structure,
Wow.
yeah, penalty decline. The
Wow.
Chargers have choked.
Wow.
The Chargers have choked.
And my perfect playoff bracket is already dead on the first day of the postseason. Wow. I had the Chargers advancing to the divisional playoffs. For anybody watching this who cares. But yeah, the Chargers have blown a 27-7 second half lead and have lost the game in the most Charger way possible. Because of course
Even
they did.
Zan, they gotta fire Brandon Staley after this. Getting your players injured in a meaningless game against the Broncos out this? How does Brandon Staley keep his job?
I don't think he does. I think the Chargers fans at this point would rather have Norv Turner as their head coach than Brandon Staley. But that's neither here nor there. Doug Peterson advances and is one game closer to facing his old team in the Super Bowl. Who would have who would have thought that? Okay, we digress. The NFL game is finished. We were in the middle of talking about what this means for Stipe Miocic. Tom said that he doesn't think that.
Yeah.
Hang on. Tom said that he doesn't think he may ever fight again. I said that I still think that Stipe Miocic is the greatest of all time, no matter what anybody. But he says, and I was just saying, I'm a positive person, and I do think that somehow or some way they're going to get a deal done, and Stipe is going to fight for a championship one way or another.
I just worry, Zan, that he's lost a bit of leverage. I mean, it's been 2 years since that fight. But as far as
it feels even longer than that if you really think about it.
as far as this thing with Francis about what you're saying about Dana's words being BS, I agree with you. However, I could see there being some middle truth to it. But if that's the case, Zan, like if there is some truth to Dana's words, then I think the problem goes more with the UFC's pay structure. Because think about it. Think about the news that Jake Paul. God, I can't believe I'm even saying those words. But the news that Jake Paul just dropped when he signed with the PFL for the super fight division. The pay-per-view revenue that these fighters at the PFL are going to get, combined with the fact that you still have the season to play where $1 million goes to the winner. Like Zan, in other words, what I'm saying is, if Francis went to the PFL super fight division, where he get what the fighters get like 50% of the revenue, so maybe he gets 25% combined with whatever he signed for with all those investors in the PFL that they're still going and can still do the $1 million tournaments, or he signs with a Bellator and becomes probably the biggest signing in Bellator history. Could he get more from doing one of those things rather than staying with the UFC and their pay-per-view point structure?
It's a very good question, and I will say this: with all of the rumors going around about Bellator potentially being for sale as we begin
Right,
2023,
that we talked about last
I'm
episode.
I know, but this is where I'm going with this. If Francis Ngannou signs with the PFL Super Fight Division, the Professional Fighters League, in my humble opinion, will officially be the number 2 MMA promotion in the world, and it won't even be close. That, that Francis Ngannou name, no matter who you put him up against, whether it's lesser competition or not, people will care it and people will purchase the product, and it honestly will legitimize or make the PFL more of a standout promotion than it was previously, because now they're not just having Kayla Harrison and Mr. Pacheco fight 300 times. You're talking about the baddest dude. You're talking about one of the baddest combat athletes in the world, not named Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, or Deontay Wilder, signing with the number 2 biggest MMA promotion in the world. Not to mention the fact that the PFL is also an ESPN, so therefore the same viewers that were watching the UFC um, uh, with
Can now
Francis
trickle over to the
previously
PFL,
can
yeah.
will trickle over to the PFL and watch that. This would be the biggest. Either way, Bellator or PFL would be the biggest signing in either promotion. I think for Francis is more value competing for $1 million though, but that's just me.
Well, Zan, I also say that considering that last week, a story that kind of flew under the radar, a little bit of speculation was going on when you considered that there was a family photo of Francis with relatives. And did you see one of the shirts that
I did.
one of the female members was wearing? It was a PFL shirt. So now I think this just, and I said it I had just posted to Fansided a Twitter reacts to the news of Jones gone and Ngannou's release. I said that this just adds more fuel to the fire. That
That's gonna
maybe
get
Ngannou's handing
that's
over.
gonna that's gonna get some crazy. That's gonna get some crazy traction tonight. I'll tell you that. That's gonna
And I
get
think,
that's gonna get some crazy numbers over the next 24 to 48 hours.
knocking on wood. Uh, but I do think that this is not that just adds fuel to the fire. That shirt, that Ngannou probably might be heading over to the PFL, but as you kind of alluded, if you're Bellator with potentially, with the biggest, no, because nobody expected that. I mean, we did have the talks about, oh, maybe he would want to leave in free agency, but just the idea that the UFC would lose its heavyweight champion and just let him go in the same way, Zan, that they just let Chris Cyborg go 3.5 years ago. I didn't think that was going to happen. I thought maybe there would be a free agent. I just didn't think that a comment like tonight where Dana White just said, "Yeah, he can just go," like unreal. And now if you're Bellator, it's like, okay, opportunities here, but the cards might be stacked up against you with that PFL shirts and what the PFL could offer with that super fight division. Because Bellator, Now, credit that, you know, we crapped on the idea of PFL having uh, the pay-per-views and expanded the
Now
pay-per-view.
now this might actually work in our favor, and now you and I might be looking like two of the biggest idiots in the space.
Well, I was
You never know.
I was gonna add. Well, I was gonna add, Zan. The to credit to them still because Bellator doesn't do pay-per-view. They did it once in 2014. They did it once in 2017 with Bellator NYC, and that's it. We haven't seen
Hmm.
the pay-per-view format doesn't seem to work with Bellator. And Bellator, as you said, mentioned for sale, which is so a signing of Francis might be what they need. But I also, Zan, we alluded to it. We were talking about the Bellator for sale story on the last edition of Outsiders back on Wednesday. Uh, Bellator has also been jumping around the networks, 3 new homes in the span of like 2 or 3 years, and Bellator has to be praying that they get a huge rating on, uh, what is it, 3 weeks from tonight now when they make their
Yep.
CBS network debut?
Yeah, 3 weeks from tonight, and it's a perfect weekend for Bellator because the UFC card airs at 1 a.m. Eastern, so Monday morning. So the Bellator event will be front and center, prime time, the biggest sporting event on TV that night by far. Absolutely.
So a lot could be riding on here. A lot could be riding on with Francis Ngannou's free agency. And Zan,
One of
like I
the
said, uh,
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
Sorry,
No,
go
you
ahead.
go ahead first.
Okay. I was just gonna say one of the last things that came to my mind on this particular topic is that if Francis goes, I think these next 7 months, now that this news is official, are going to tell us a lot. I really do think that if it comes down to the PFL and Bellator, it is going to be the biggest MMA signing story since Fedor Emelianenko left Affliction. That's number that's number one. Number two, it's going to be the biggest bidding war in the history of mixed martial arts. You can't tell me that there isn't a bigger demand for this guy for anyone non UFC than him now. His stock just rose by a gazillion, right? And then number three, to top it all off, he has a chance to compete in a newly formed PFL super fight division. And you and I both know how highly praised Jake Paul has been about Francis Ngannou's ability as a fighter and how he's always wanted to help him. Well, now they can strike where the iron is hot, and Jake Paul can put his money where his mouth is, not just as a fighter, but as a
As a
promoter. So this
promoter.
story has so many different storylines that you can't even wrap your head around half of them.
And Zan, two things going off of that. One, it would have to be between Bellator and PFL, right? There's no way Chatri's going to come with some huge offer to try to get Francis Ngannou to one championship, right? There's no way Rise
No
is
way.
involved in this.
No way, absolutely not. And they're not big enough anyway. And this is no disrespect. This is just how their promotions are. They're not big enough anyway to get a name like Francis Ngannou that the people on that side of the world could gravitate towards. And I don't think anybody would want to watch Francis Ngannou's fights in the United States at an ungodly hour on a Friday or Saturday morning with nothing
On Amazon
else.
Prime.
Yeah, exactly. Hmm.
And secondly, Zan, considering the Bellator and PFL state, here's an interesting question. Considering the failed negotiations with the UFC, do you think there's a chance that Francis Ngannou could basically price himself out with these promotions? And let me add a 2B to that. Is there a chance where, especially if he does price himself out, does he go to the boxing world?
It's a good question. Well, Dana made it very clear that there were no boxing clauses in his current contract. So that leads me to believe that now that he's a free agent, he has a chance to do whatever he wants. And I think the PFL and Bellator seem like organizations where they're open to these cross promotional opportunities. So to answer the question, I think that anything is possible in regards to this whole free agent cycle with Francis, and it'll be very interesting to see where it goes for sure.
And then, one thing, but I want to go back to this one thing on the Jones Gone side. Just laughing about how it came about because the T-Mobile Arena supposedly released it. You know, they have signage outside promoting upcoming events at the arena, and they posted a sign of Jones versus Gane at UFC 285 for the heavyweight title on March 4th. Do you think this was truly a mistake? And if so, do you think somebody's getting fired? Because Dana said he was
No,
very pissed off.
no, I don't. No, I don't think anybody's going to get fired. I do think they jumped the gun on it for sure. Thank goodness that it wasn't fake and that it was real. That's a good thing because there were Twitter not Twitter trolls, but I will say there were Twitter consumers that were trying to throw out their Photoshop conspiracy theories, and those quickly were bogged down. I will say though, it kind of adds to the drama of the whole story of what this whole saga has been, and I feel like this signage reveal or leak, if you will, was just cherry on top. That's what that's what I that's what I think. I will say this though, for any of the for any of the casuals out there who were thinking of buying UFC 285, I'm curious to know what that crowd will do now, considering that the major cash cow, if you will, is no longer in the picture. Just something to think about. Not trying to call anyone in particular out, but just a nudge type thing. Anybody who thought about buying UFC 285 just for Francis, I'm sorry that we have to break your heart tonight, but it is what it
Agreed.
is.
And I think definitely Jones Gone is going to do less buys than Jones and Ngannou. I think Jones and Ngannou could have gotten the million mark, but Zan, to be fair, Jones has been consistently a 600,000, 700,000 pay-per-view buys guy, if I'm not mistaken. He hasn't
Yeah, I
gotten a
don't.
million.
Yeah, he hasn't gotten a million. I think the closest he ever came was DC number one, if I'm not mistaken.
It's one
Is
the
the
two DC fights fell short of a million, but it was still a respectable number. I mean, Stipe hasn't hit a million, but he was a 700,000, 750,000 guy, I think.
Mhm.
So
especially the fights with JDS, Overeem, and Francis all did well. So
yeah, so I'm not too worried. Here is a question because we bring up Dana White. This is my time to put the little tinfoil hack conspiracy thing of the timing of this. Do you think some of this, yeah, conveniently puts off maybe some of the pressure that Dana was facing in the wake of his little slap video that we discussed on the last episode, the incident with his wife on New Year's?
it's hard not to believe anything otherwise at this point. And I think, as we alluded to off the air, I think Endeavor, wanted to cover their trails, so to speak, and this was their way of doing it. And hopefully, and this is my conspiracy theory, hopefully they didn't piss the fans off on purpose. But yeah, there you go.
Uh,
I will say this. I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen this on several occasions tonight over the course of social media. I'm not going to call anybody out, but there have been people who have said that they are considering no longer watching the sport because of because of because of this news and everything that's gone on with Francis' mistreatment. And I just wanted to know your brief thoughts on the people who think it's a good idea to either boycott or say that they are no longer MMA fans because of this fight. I'm obviously not one of them. Am I super excited for this fight? No. Do I think it's an intriguing fight stylistically? Yes. Do I
yeah,
not like the way that it's played out necessarily? No, I
hell
am
yeah.
not. Does it mean that I'm no longer an MMA fan? Absolutely not.
No, and Zan, and honestly, I came from the world from MMA. Like it was tough. It was the original tough season where I started my MMA journey, and I came from to that from the pro wrestling side. And we've seen this with the pro wrestling side too. All of the tribalism with WWE versus AEW and stuff. Like competition is a good thing. You can't take it out on the whole industry. If you want to take a break from the industry, fine. But there's always something great. Like we just mentioned, because of this one incident in the lead MMA promotion, you're done with MMA. No, go watch Bellator, go watch PFL or One Championship or Verizon or KSW or ACA,
LFA, man, Legacy Fighting
LFA,
Alliance.
Cage Warriors. Don't take it out on everybody else trying to make themselves better in the sport.
Agreed. Very, very well said. Because we've kind of exhausted this topic, do you want to move on to the other big news that the big
Yeah,
boss revealed at the press conference tonight?
let's briefly because we're already over 45 minutes in this broadcast, which I'm not surprised with all that we had to talk. But basically, this is like an episode in itself. So let's spend just a little bit on this. Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman 3 welterweight championship, not official, but Dana has hinted it's being finalized. We should see it finalized very soon. It will be the main event in London. UFC 286, March 18th at the O2 Arena, 2 weeks after the Jones Gunn heavyweight title fight. The co-main event, Zan. Oh boy, you want to talk about light heavyweight action. Justin Gaethje, Mr. Performance of the Night, Mr. Fight of the Night, Mr. Performance Bonus, taking on Rafael Fiziev, one of the up-and-comers trying to get into that upper echelon of that lightweight division. And Zan, that one really sparks my interest. Not maybe as much as the circumstances of Edwards Usman 3 because of the circumstances of what happened in August. But oh man, that's going to be a great appetizer to the main course of that title fight.
Absolutely. This is a phenomenal card, or at least it's shaping up to be that way. I don't have any early predictions on these two fights. I'm excited to cover them as we get closer, but man, Dana, I'm gonna say this is all I have to say about this. Dana said that they were gonna deliver to the fans in London in March, and he was not. And he literally moved the entire schedule around for this, and I think it's gonna pay off, and I think it's gonna be. I think this Edwards Usman trilogy rivals the magnitude of what Hughes GSP did in 2004 and 2006. I think it has that level of prestige, and we're now getting the modern day version of what that rivalry was for yesteryear, and it should be a phenomenal main event that again I'm super excited to take down with you, and I truly do think we're going to see who the best welterweight in the world is with the winner of this fight, assuming we don't have a second quadrilogy. And then in the co-main event, as you said, stylistic matchup is awesome. Justin Gaethje fought for the title before Rafael Fiziev. This could be his big coming out party. He's been on a long winning streak himself. You never know. Oh, the winner of this fight could easily get a title shot later this year. A lot of ramifications in the co-main event. Overall, the first quarter of the UFC in 2023, if it all stays together, is going to be absolute madness, and it's truly going to be a joy to cover because this is the best part of the sport when you have so many back to back to back, just unbelievable cards to where you feel like, can we get this every single weekend, and it feels exactly that way as we start the year.
Right. I mean, granted, like I said, financially, it might be a drain on a person's wallet, considering it's gonna be like $80 within the span 4 times in the span of 2 months. But as you alluded to, Zan, this has the opportunity in terms of pay-per-views to be, just counting the pay-per-views, not counting the fight nights, to be the greatest Q1 of a year in UFC history.
I think it
Especially with
already. I think it already is in the. Hey, in
in,
the
in terms of
in
hype, yeah. Dan, in terms of hype, yeah, but I want to hope that these fights actually play out well, especially when you consider the rockiness and just craziness of how 2023 has started in this sport, let alone all of sports.
very well said. Yeah, I mean, truly, we're going to have a lot more to talk about in the weeks to come. But without a doubt, in the history of this show, this is the biggest news we've ever broken in this short time, and I'm not doubting that there will be more, because there will be more in the coming weeks and months to come. But yeah, I mean, this was a wild impromptu episode, one that I'll never forget. And let's just hope now it's January 14th at 11:54 Eastern, 10:54 my time here in Chicago, that all of these fights we just talked about happen without any sort of glitches or issues or anything like that. Because then we'll have another story on top of the story we just broke. So there you go. That's Q1 in the UFC, and there's a lot to look forward to moving right along. So it should be a very interesting first half of the year, without a doubt.
For sure. Those of you who are just tuning in, we are closing things out. The replay will be available just within the next minute or so once YouTube gets itself situated with, processing the whole live stream. Just to recap the breaking news to end it on, Jones Gone is official. Jon Jones will be making his return to the UFC for the first time in 3 years at UFC 285 on March 4th. That card now has a main event. It will be this vacant heavyweight title on the line, interim tag. It will be for the full heavyweight championship. The reason being the shocking portion of this, Francis Ngannou outright released by the UFC. There is no he'll be champ until the cage door closes with Jones and Gane. None of that. There is no matching period. That it's done. Francis Ngannou will not be seen in the UFC again. We think he's free to sign with any promotion. Definitely going to be an interesting race, as we alluded to earlier, between the Professional Fighters League and Bellator as to who can sign the services of Ngannou right now, based on the photo that we discussed, based on Jake Paul and the new super fight division. PFL is leaning into being the favorite to sign Francis. And on top of that, it looks like Edwards Usman 3 for the welterweight title. The trilogy fight will definitely be for UFC 286 in London 2 weeks later, March 18th, with Justin Gaethje and Rafael Fiziev to serve as that co-main event. Thank you for tuning into what was a breaking news stream that kind of has turned, as you said, Zan, into an impromptu episode of the MMA Outsiders, just surrounding just one story with the multiple angles. Make sure to follow us across social media at MMA Outsiders ETB. If you are watching us on Facebook, give us a like. If you are watching us on Twitter, please make sure to hit that follow button. Make sure to retweet the stream for multiple people to see. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network, us at the MMA Outsiders, as well as Empty the Bench, Game On, Fruity Cereals, so much more. That is Zain Bando. You can follow him at Zambando99, and you can find his work over at bjpen.com. I am Tom Albano. You can find me at Thomas J. Albano and Tom Talk Sports 9, and you can find my work over at Fansided MMA. A lot that we have discussed, and a lot more that we will discuss on this coming next edition of the MMA Outsiders, episode 22. We will recap this story and discuss any new information that comes out in the coming days. Episode 22 should be coming out Tuesday morning, if not Wednesday morning. Until then, and we will, of course, this coming episode discuss UFC 283 coming up. Plus, we just had Sean Strickland winning in the main event, so I guess we gotta talk about that. Not the greatest of cards, and it kind of feels like in the shadows now that all of this news breaking.
Well said. Absolutely.
So for Zan, I'm Tom. We'll see you on episode 22 of the MMA Outsiders. Take care, everybody. Have a good rest of your night.
Have a good one.